Hello, and welcome back to the Elden Ring tales. If you haven't watched the prologue, then I can assure you that you haven't missed much so far. Well, depends on your viewpoint. I reviewed almost every game I played in the last 12 months, and that is a lot, but regarding Elden Ring, this is the true start. If you watched the last video, then I can assure you that there will be much more action and gameplay, but I will still be talking a lot. And the topic of today is... wait, it's the horse. I remember the horse from the trailers.
Don't worry, Torrent. Fortune is on his side. We found him here, after all.
And who are you? Pokey Minch? Did you do this to me?
One of his kind is sure to seek the Elden Ring.
Ah, she did it. She said the title of the game.
Even if it does violate the Golden Order.
Just like in Dark Souls. Where was I? Romancing Saga 3? No, the horse and the trailers. I remember the early announcements of Elden Ring. In one of the first screenshots they showed the player character riding some sort of animal. There were also images of multiple ghosts, things that seemed to support the player. These images combined with the announcement that Elden Ring would be an open world game gave the impression that it would be completely different from Dark Souls titles. However, I also remember my reaction when FromSoftware showed gameplay footage for the first time. I discussed it with some friends and I had one question for them. Doesn't the game kinda look like a mod for Dark Souls 3? And they admitted that yes, the footage really looked like a Dark Souls 3 mod. When looking at UI elements or at the visuals in general, there were a lot of similarities, and even today with the finished product, I can't shake that feeling how similar it looks and feels. It doesn't look like a mod, of course, but is this game actually Dark Souls 4? Let me explain what I mean. This game is obviously called Elden Ring and not Dark Souls. Back in 2016, the director of most Soulsborne games of FromSoftware, Hidetaka Miyazaki, famously announced that there were no more plans for new Dark Souls games, and that he and his team wanted to try out something new. And this still seems to be true. Since the Ringed City DLC, there were no new adventures in the world of Dark Souls, and the story about kindling the flame was not continued. I'm pretty sure that Elden Ring will not continue it as well. So in a way, there is no Dark Souls 4 so far. But if you look at it from a gameplay perspective, things look different. After the Ringed City DLC for Dark Souls 3, FromSoftware's next title was Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice, which is an excellent game by the way, but it is a very different title. Different enough that I wouldn't call it Souls-like. Elden Ring, on the other hand, seems pretty close to Dark Souls, so the question is, did FromSoftware return to the Soulsborne genre, but just didn't call it Dark Souls 4? Did they take the core of Dark Souls into a different world? And as a player, if I want to continue playing games like Dark Souls, then is Elden Ring the spiritual successor? Can it fill the role of an actual Dark Souls 4? Or is it too different in the end? This question was on my mind when I started the game, and I want to share my thoughts on it. Since I'm still in the beginning, my mind may change over time, but I nevertheless want to analyze the beginning of the game and present you my first impression. At the end of this video, there will be a clear answer. Is this game actually Dark Souls 4 or not? Let's start with something simple. The moveset of the player character. Thankfully, there is this tutorial cave at the beginning and it really supports my topic here. because most of what we've seen so far is just a repeat of what you usually can do in a Souls game. But there are new things, however, there are always new things. For example, Dark Souls 2 had power stancing, which added movesets to dual-wield weapons. Dark Souls 3 had weapon arts. Both were significant additions that could influence your playstyle a lot, but they didn't really change the core gameplay. Managing your stamina, learning attack patterns of enemies and dodging or blocking properly were still a bigger focus than the new additions. So what about Elden Ring? If I look at the tutorial, there are 3 new significant moves. Number 1 would be jumping, and this is certainly a big one. Being able to move vertically is new for Souls games, and I can think of a lot of situations in the older games where being able to jump would completely remove the challenge of specific areas. The first thing that comes to mind is that stupid barrier in Dark Souls 2 which didn't let you pass unless you defeated the major bosses of the game. An Elden Ring character could just jump over the rubble and skip most of the game. So in terms of traversing and exploring areas, this is a huge deal and it opens up a lot of new possibilities for the level design. But does this count as a major gameplay change? Well, let's also talk about the applications in battle. Being able to jump adds a new form of dodging. So far I didn't notice any invincibility frames, but just moving your character up can avoid a lot of low horizontal attacks. FromSoftware kind of prepared us in Sekiro for this trick, but there it was a much more explicit element with its own sound effect and UI element. So far I didn't find much use of dodging with a jump, but it is certainly an option. Regarding offensive capabilities, the jump definitely brings new stuff to the table. You can cover a lot of distance quickly and perform 1 of 2 jumping attacks. That is a new tool in your arsenal and it changes your spacing during fights. In the Dark Souls games, when fighting bigger enemies and bosses, you usually want to stay out of the range of enemy attacks. But you also want to be close enough so you can walk in and attack after an opening. That put a lot of emphasis on your positioning, but also on the range of your weapons. Being in the right position is a key skill for these games, and sometimes there wasn't even a right position. You had to choose how much risk you were willing to take. Jump attacks bypass this process in a way. The reach of your jump seems fixed, and the range of your weapon doesn't seem to influence the range of the jump attack a lot. I assume that in Elden Ring the ideal position will often be determined by your jumping distance, and that there is less emphasis on staying just outside of the enemy's range. Also, having a short hitbox is probably no longer a big disadvantage for a weapon, because you can easily get in with a jump. This probably makes daggers and other short weapons much more viable than in Dark Souls games. But there will probably be ways to counteract that. I expect there to be enemies with specific anti-air attacks and also enemies that are very mobile and can close the distance faster than the heavy brutes from Dark Souls games. Fighting in general will probably be a bit more agile, maybe even like Bloodborne but with jumping instead of dashing. Well, we will see, but there is definitely a lot of potential here. So much about jumping for now. I will probably have more to say about it in the future, but this is definitely a big change, and that was just the first new move. The other 2 will be discussed later, because we have the first boss fight coming up. After the game showed me this new checkpoint system, there is a golden fog wall. And I remembered, this whole tutorial section is optional, you can just walk by it. So the upcoming boss is also optional. And that opens up a lot of possibilities. Can you imagine FromSoftware trapping players by leading them down this hole into the tutorial cave and then putting a really hard boss at the end? Someone like Father Gascon from Bloodborne, who you can only defeat if you really master the basics? So you get stuck in the tutorial unless you beat the boss, knowing that you could just create a new character and don't jump down into the cave at the beginning. Wouldn't that be the most FromSoftware way of doing it? Teaching the player that you aren't even ready for the tutorial and should rather start a new character. Okay, Soldier of Godric, show me what you got. Oh. No, 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 that's not okay. No, no, don't show me that text. Stop the music. That was disgusting. That wasn't even a boss fight. What's going on here? Some kind of sick joke? I'm not saying that my idea about having a real difficult boss here would be the best solution, but everything would have been better than this. I feel tricked and insulted. This is not how you do a first boss. And I will just pretend it never happened. That's probably for the best. Actually, having no boss here would have been a more elegant solution. Just place the enemy here, show your message about the guard counter, no boss music, just a normal encounter. This was stupid. This was nothing. Nothing happened here. Let's just move on. This is probably a good opportunity to talk about how this video will continue. I should have done that at the start, but well. From here on out there will be a lot of cuts and I will focus on the footage that is actually interesting. I will also try to do all my menu work when I sit down at a bonfire. So reading item descriptions, looking at new equipment, leveling up, these will all happen off screen. If I make bigger changes to my build, I will show it of course, but for now I will stick with what I started with. So let's skip how I attacked and rolled into a lot of walls, because I don't know if there are illusionary walls in this game, and cut to Ren Rama-sama, the great hunter of Kamura, which is the village in Monster Hunter Rise by the way, because he is my character from that game, arriving in Limgrave. First impression, this looks nice. From all the starting areas of FromSoftware games, this looks the most inviting. A place that you actually want to visit. And there are probably more bright colors in this view alone than in the whole Dark Souls series. Comparing it to other open world games, this first view also does a good job at showing you different interesting locations. There's the castle in the background, the big tree of course, which seems to be pretty far away. Then there's the ruins of a church close by, several structures like towers or a bridge in the background. Lots of options to explore. And there is this huge golden knight as well that you can see in the background from time to time. He reminds me of the second enemy in Nioh 2. He has this menacing aura that clearly tells me that I should not mess with him right now. I did mess with the enemy in Nioh 2 and that led to a lot of deaths until I finally beat him. A word of advice. If you ever happen to play Nioh 2, just ignore the second enemy. You will have a much better time this way. Unless you are as insane as me. But Ren Rama-sama is not as insane, so he will avoid him for now. Fighting a knight would also be out of character for a monster hunter. Instead, let us focus on a completely new feature, the map. Including a map to an open world game is a no-brainer, but I want to do a little thought experiment. Games like Bloodborne or Dark Souls 1 don't have a map. And that's a good thing, because exploring their game worlds and not always knowing where exactly you are is part of the experience. A map would take away a lot of the tension and of the sense of adventure those games create. So if we transfer that to Elden Ring, could this game actually work without a map? I don't know yet, but maybe you have already played it. If yes, then try to imagine it. Would the absence of a map increase the tension of exploring the world? Would it add to the adventure and give you that feeling that you really explore these lands? Or would it just be annoying and the map is a clear necessity for this game? I don't know, but in my opinion it's worth considering it. In one of the later chapters I might come back to this topic. But one thing that is good about this map, at the moment it is rather empty and it is clearly incomplete. The game world will be bigger than this, but there's no telling how much bigger. So there are already some open questions here. In which direction will the map expand and how far? How big will it be in the end and where will the most important places be? All this adds to the mystery of the world. And speaking of mysteries...
Oh yes, tarnished are we? come to the lands between for the Elden Ring? Of course you have. No shame in it. Unfortunately for you, however, you are maidenless. Without guidance, without the strength of runes, and without an invitation to the Round Table Hold, you are fated, it seems, to die in obscurity.
And this charming creature will introduce himself as Vare. From here on he will go on about how I should follow the golden lines of the Sides of Grace and that I should go to Stormvale Castle, the huge fortress on the horizon. I will not be doing that because right now I'm more intrigued to see what this area has to offer. Vare also brought up a lot of new terms and gave some cryptic story exposition. It's too early to interpret that, but there is one thing that is rather remarkable for the topic of this chapter. Vare seems to be a confident character. He is joking, sarcastic, and seems to have some sort of agenda. Also, I'm not sure if he will stab my back at some point of the game. Something about him seems vicious. He is clearly not the archetype that FromSoftware used in Dark Souls and Demon Souls. In those games, the first NPC that you usually meet is the crestfallen warrior, or a variation of him. He's usually sitting around, lacks any sort of motivation, and has given up. He's often portrayed as being on a similar quest as the player character, but the cruelty of the world and the high difficulty of the game has drenched him of all hope, and so he sits defeated in the Nexus, in Majula, and so on. He is in stark contrast to the player character who is facing the challenges of the world and who makes progress, and often this has influence on the crestfallen warrior. Maybe an NPC like that will appear later, but facing someone like Vare at the beginning definitely pushes the game away from the Dark Souls series. But on the other hand, his character is different, but mechanically he's just the same as a Dark Souls NPC. You have to talk to him multiple times until he starts repeating his dialogue, and I'm sure if I progress through the game, he will have new things to say, or might even change his location. Also, the presentation is straight out of Dark Souls, with the button prompts, the subtitles at the bottom of the screen, and so on. I mean, it's clearly working, and you don't have to change a working presentation, but adding some new elements like dialogue boxes or character portraits like in other RPGs would have gone a long way in moving the atmosphere farther away from Dark Souls. So all in all, it's the same it always was, and just from this first encounter I'm pretty sure that I know how the interaction with other types of NPCs, like merchants, will work mechanically. It really feels like it's Dark Souls 4. Meanwhile, I decided on a direction to explore. The Grace wants me to go north, so that is out. In the west there's the sea, and in the south there is more land, but it is blocked by water. So east it is. Also, I could see a swamp area, and I'm curious if they put their famous poisonous swamp that is in all of their games, if they put it at the beginning of the first area. That would be hilarious. But false alarm, no poison buildup here. Instead we have these flying creatures, and you can see me using the jump to deal with them. I didn't think about it earlier, but thanks to jumping, they can do a lot with flying enemies. As long as they are close enough to the ground, you can attack them with outranged weapons, and that makes flying creatures fitting enemies for this game. I am actually looking forward to more of that. And thankfully, there is another example coming up. Enjoy! This is a Dark Souls classic. Getting ambushed by a dragon in the beginning is almost a tradition at this point. Usually it happens in some sort of city or castle, that's why I didn't see it coming here. But apart from that, from all of FromSoftware's dragon ambushes, this one is surprisingly fair. You don't immediately get killed by a breath of fire, and you get plenty of time to retreat. Also, the dragon comes down on your level instead of staying in the air all the time, so you don't have to fire 400 arrows at it. Right here I'm gathering some data. I'm not thinking about defeating it right now, but I just wanted to see how much damage my axe does, and then I try to run away. So far I haven't been killed, except by the grafted scion in the prologue, but that one doesn't count, it was more like a forced death. And letting this ruffian getting the first kill on me would hurt Ren Rama-sama's pride as a monster hunter. So it's time to run away. Uh-oh. There was certainly some luck involved, but who cares? Still a deathless run. During this whole ordeal, and even before that, you could see me using the crouch a lot, and this leads us back to the topic of the new moves this game introduces. I talked about jumping earlier, and number 2 is the crouch, which is new to the Souls series. By itself there is not much to say about it. It slows down your movement and gives you access to a crouch attack, which seems to be the same as an attack after a dodge. Also, your hurt box is smaller, but I don't see many practical applications for that. The act of crouching is pretty boring, but there is something interesting attached to it. The tutorial clearly alluded to some kind of stealth system in the game. It seems to be simple. The crouching apparently reduces the enemy aggro range and makes you less visible, but there's also something going on with cover. Walking through something like bushes seems to further decrease your visibility. So it's not Metal Gear Solid 5 by any means, but it is a step towards the stealth gameplay present in Sekiro. It's not the same, of course. The player character is less nimble and has less options to hide. Also, there is no stealth takedown that instantly kills enemies. But getting a free backstab on an unaware enemy is always nice, and Elden Ring appears to give you more tools for doing that. Then again, stealth is no new concept in Dark Souls games. By walking slowly behind an enemy or by using certain sorceries, you could always get a sneaky backstab, even back in Dark Souls 1. So far, nothing I've seen in Elden Ring elevates it into a stealth game. Crouching and hiding in bushes is just a new tool, but I don't see a huge impact. And even without the crouch, it is rather easy to avoid enemy encounters because of the wide and open areas that you explore. It's not like the narrow and cramped streets of the Undead Burg or of Yanam, where you couldn't keep your distance to enemies when you wanted to progress. Avoiding whole areas like the swamp with its ruins is not an option there. So it's the level design. The crouch itself doesn't add much to the game so far. But who knows, maybe there will be specific stealth challenges in the game later on. Areas with powerful enemies or stage hazards that you can circumvent by sneaking around them. I could see that happening in Elden Ring. But as I said, so far the crouch doesn't bring much to the table, and that's why it doesn't differentiate Elden Ring from other Souls titles enough. But here's a new thing, an enemy on a horse. That seems kinda unfair because he can just ride around and there's nothing I can do about it. But thankfully he doesn't seem to be the smartest fellow, he just uses the same approach over and over again. But one interesting thing to note, the horse actually has its own HP bar, so I could kill the rider or just kill the horse, and that should lead to different situations. Or I can just kill both of them. Well, he won't be the only riding enemy, so more on that in the future. Directly after that, there's the next interesting encounter, this time with an NPC who has an extremely stylish armor set. He has something interesting to say.
Ah, you must be the new Tarnished. And quite a fool by the look of it, picking a fight with a dragon. Well, I can tell you want to see it through.
Hell yeah, I will. He is Ren Rama-sama after all. But for now I keep heading east, and here's the next encounter. At first I wasn't sure how to handle this. Having two enemy groups fighting each other is to my advantage, but maybe there's more to it? I wanted to test something out, so I sided with the humans and only attacked the goblin-like creatures. Maybe the humans would recognize my actions and become friendly? But no, when the last goblin was down, the humans ganged up on me. They don't seem to act rationally, but rather attack everything that is not like themselves. So I had to kill them as well. The learning here is that in these lands, everything is hostile except for talkable NPCs that are passively standing around. And look what's standing around close by. That's a familiar sight. I immediately became hostile here because I hate these things. That's a giant crab from Dark Souls 3. Look at it. It has the same model and the moveset. Why? Why is one of my most hated enemies here? The answer probably revolves around the words time and budget. If they want to have an enormous cast of different enemies, then recycling ones from earlier games is a cost-efficient way of doing it. I'm sure there are a lot of interesting, well-designed new enemies in Elden Ring, so I won't blame them if there are some reappearances. And the crabs are a good choice. I hate them, but I admit that they are challenging and well-designed. But this is the first area, this is part of the first impression you have with the game. And that should be as good as possible. Putting recycled enemies in the first area, I think that's a poor decision. Recycling the crabs is fine, but put them in later parts of the game and start with new creative enemies. Short quiz. What is even better than having one giant crab? Two, of course. But joking aside, it is actually better, because one of them just straight up murders the other one. I'm not sure why. Maybe its AI wanted to attack me but was blocked by the other. Or it became aggressive when the other one accidentally hit the first one. All options are interesting and it creates a funny situation. So enemies can hurt their peers. Maybe I will be able to use that again. Just a bit farther to the east, there's the next interesting encounter. There are these, well, stone robot snakes. They look so stiff and mechanical, and these lights at the front. I'm not sure what they are supposed to be, but stone robot snakes sounds fitting to me. Curiously, they are not hostile at all. I tried to run and roll into them, but nothing aggroes them. I didn't attack them because I'm not a jerk. So far most creatures were hostile, so it's nice to have some neutral robots as well. It's the same reason why I didn't attack any turtles or eagles. Ren Rama-sama is a hunter, but not a psychopath. What's even more interesting is this thing in the middle. It's called an I had to look that up. Gaol is an Old English word which means jail and is pronounced in a similar way, more like Everjail. So a free translation would be eternal prison. I didn't know that when playing, and I was very suspicious what would happen if I entered this thing. After a bit of pondering, I finally took the risk, and this is the result. Isn't that an Outrider Knight from Dark Souls 3? The posture and the armor set look suspiciously similar, and the way it moves and how it attacks. Pretty close if you ask me. Those jerks are from Iryfil and, as the name suggests, they travel far away from their home country. Fitting. First the crabs and now one of those. There must be a portal to Dark Souls 3 somewhere. But for him it's just the looks that seem similar. The moveset is new, at least as far as I can tell. And this looks interesting. This seems to be a fun fight. At least until now, because here's my first death. Not surprising, because this enemy is tough. But my death here also highlights a new feature, the Stake of Marika, which works like a checkpoint. Just look at how fast I'm back at the entrance of the fight. My last sight of grace is all the way back where I talked with Vare. If the game put me there, I would need a lot of time to come back here. I like that, but I want to stress that these checkpoints should not be placed too generously. One important ingredient of the tension and difficulty of these games is that you never know how far it is to the next bonfire, and that you sometimes have to risk a lot of progress if you push forward and try the next challenge. Because of this checkpoint here, I can immediately get back to the fight, and there's no risk of losing my runes. So there's no harm in trying it over and over. I'm still in the starting area and learning the game, so it's fine. But I don't think the game should treat all mini-bosses or difficult challenges the same way. Losing your progress and your souls is part of the experience after all. And the lower the stakes to a fight, the less tension there is. Right here, apart from my pride, there's practically no risk involved in fighting the Outrider Knight over and over again. By the way, I'll be adding this counter on the top whenever I'm fighting a special foe like this. I don't want to show all the attempts in their full length, but I want to keep track of them, so you can easily see how much experience I had with the enemy so far. Also, I think it's fun to see how often I die against the same enemy, don't you think? This whole situation here reminds me of Hollow Knight. In that game, you can find the warrior's dreams by exploring the world. When you activate them, you fight a mini-boss. Essentially, they are goodies that are hidden in the world, and the reward for finding them is a cool little fight and a reward if you beat them. The Everjail seems to be the same thing, at least if there is more than one, which I'm just assuming for now. I like this concept, as long as the fights are cool, of course. This one is fun, it's the most complex enemy I've fought so far, and the moveset is really strange. I was immediately motivated to try it again. Also, there is a lot to learn here. For example, how status build-ups work, in this case Bloodlust, and about defensive maneuvers in general. Until now I didn't really have to use them, but avoiding damage is vital in this fight or I get overpowered quickly. You might be able to see how I learn the attack patterns of this enemy and how I slowly find opportunities to deal consistent damage as well. And how I screw up during learning, of course. I also learned to appreciate the last new move the tutorial introduced to me, so I will finally talk about it. It's the guard counter, the one that was used at the end of the tutorial when nothing noteworthy happened. Nothing. It didn't work out here, but I took this learning to the next attempt. You can see me fishing for opportunities to use it. It's working great, so I'm quickly getting carried away and reckless. I'm taking a bit too much risk here, but it creates some cool sequences. One thing I want to point out here, this fight is a good example of what I said earlier when I was talking about jump attacks and being in the right distance. This enemy denies any advantage I could have with the jump because he is so fast and mobile. He is quick stepping all over the place and sometimes after an attack he retreats immediately. Most of the time he decides how far away he wants to be and I can only make slight adjustments. To counterattack I basically have to evade his strikes in a way that leaves me close enough to attack him. This also makes the guard counter a useful tool in this fight. Honestly, I should be dead right now. I didn't watch my health during this whole sequence. Typical rookie mistake. It's just luck that this attempt is still going on. Now watch this sequence. 1, 2, and 3. Take that. Huh, that didn't do as much damage as I thought. Well, now I have to bring it home safely. Don't get greedy now. And another guard counter at the end. Good fight, I enjoyed this one a lot. For an optional mini-boss, this was a well-designed enemy. And I also got his weapon as a prize. However, I'm not able to use it at the moment. Since I haven't found a way to level up yet, I'm still with my starting stats. But one day I will try that sort out. After my bout with the Outrider Knight, I continue to the bridge to the east, and while this is going, I want to analyze the guard counter some more. Ironically, in the upcoming scene you will see me using crouching and jumping a lot, but no guard counters. So you have to use your memory and imagination. But please cut me some slack here, this is just my second video and it's hard to match the gameplay footage with the topics I want to talk about. Anyway, the guard counter. For me it is a weird new move, because it seems to offer an alternative to parrying. The ability to parry was already in Demon's Souls, and it is a staple of Soulspawn games. The concept is simple to learn, but hard to execute consistently. When you initiate a parry, it plays a short animation. If you get attacked during its active frames, you parry the attack, which means you negate all damage, and you break the stance of the enemy. In this state you can perform a critical attack. It's the same state that you saw earlier on the Outrider Knight after the cool string of attacks when I performed the visceral attack from the front. But parrying is quite challenging, because it requires very good timing and also a lot of knowledge about how enemies perform their attacks. If you completely botch it, you are wide open and take the hit. If you are lucky, you at least take reduced damage when the attack hits shortly after the parry frames. All in all, it's a high risk and high reward option. You either get hit or can perform a counterattack, but you need almost perfect timing for it. There is no shame if you never used it. Dodging, for example, has much more active frames and is much easier to perform. But now we have the guard counter, which works differently. It is activated after you block an attack, meaning the damage has already been negated. Depending on your shield, it might not be 100% of it, but it is the same as for every other block, so it should be good enough. If you press R2 after a block, you perform the guard counter, which seems to deal a lot of poise damage. As we have seen, enemies have a limited amount of poise, and you can break their stance by depleting it. The Outrider Knight took longer, but smaller normal enemies can get stance broken with just one guard counter. I played around with it in this PlayStation, and the poise damage of the guard counter seems to be similar to a fully charged heavy attack, although the charge attack is probably stronger. All this means the guard counter doesn't guarantee a stance break and thus a counter hit. The reward for parrying is still higher, so most of the time you will need multiple guard counters or other sources of poise damage. But the guard counter has almost no risk. The only thing that can happen is that the enemy keeps attacking after your block and you get hit before your guard counter connects. This can happen, but it is easy to learn and adapt. You just need to find out when an enemy continues attacking and when the string ends. And you'll be doing that anyway, because even when you are dodging or blocking, you are waiting for an opening before you attack. So if you ask me, the guard counter sounds like an easy and low risk way to get stance breaks consistently, and it seems to be quite abusable. I will test that out and try to abuse it. We will see how that goes. In summary, the guard counter is a new option that you have, and a rather powerful option. but it doesn't significantly change the game because it doesn't really add something new. Stance breaking and attacking after blocking were all present back in Demon's Souls, but now we have a new tool to play around with. Like power stancing in Dark Souls 2. For some playstyles it will have a huge impact, especially for the classic sword and board style, but all in all the game doesn't change a lot because of it. The meta of the game might change, and using guard counters could become a dominant strategy, one that is so useful that it is the best way to play the game. But even then, the tool itself is not a revolution in the game design of Soulsborne titles. If I compare it to jumping, I don't see nearly as much potential to change the way the game feels. That's all the new moves, but before I give my final thoughts on them, I want to point out that after the battle on the big bridge, I found my first sight of grace since all the way back where I talked with Vare. That's quite some distance. I wonder if I took such a weird route that I missed a couple of those, or if this distance is normal for this game. Maybe you always have to travel this far to find new bonfires. I like the idea, and I'm interested to see if this was the rule or the exception. Not far away there's the next NPC encounter. Her name is Irina and she talks about a castle Morn. She's blind and helpless, and I'm pretty sure she can cast miracles. Because she is eerily similar to an NPC from Dark Souls 3 who is also called Irina. There are so many parallels that it can't be a coincidence, and the funniest thing about it is that Irina from Dark Souls 3 is clearly based on a character on Dark Souls 1. Seems like she is reincarnating a lot. FromSoftware seems to like her or her archetype, and the theory about a portal to Dark Souls 3 seems to be true. But it is good I met her, because she gives me a quest that Ren Rama-sama can get behind. She mentions that there is a riot at Castle Morn and...
But I swear I heard frightful howling from all over.
That sounds like monsters. She actually just asks me to deliver a letter, but Ren Rama-sama will hunt down those monsters. So to Castle Morn it is. While I'm on my way, let's once again talk about the new moves Elden Ring adds to the Dark Souls formula. I discussed the guard counter, crouching and jumping in detail. If I sum it up, then Elden Ring sure does bring new stuff to the table, and I can't stress enough how huge adding jumping is. So far the game feels different because of that. But then again, I would still describe the gameplay as Dark Souls with jumping. I want to compare it to Sekiro, a game that is clearly not Dark Souls 4, let alone a Soulsborne title. If we just look at the movement of the player character, then we see a lot of differences. The protagonist Wolf moves quickly, can jump around, throw a grappling hook and zip through the stages. He is much more mobile compared to a Souls character, and the game emphasizes movement and stealth much more. In many parts of the game you do not need to fight most of the enemies, because you can sneak by them or defeat them instantly with a stealth takedown. And even in fights, Sekiro plays out totally different. Fighting revolves around deflecting and evading the enemy attacks, and to deplete their posture gauge so you can finally kill them in a cinematic way. It is very different than fighting in a Soulsborne game, and if we try to see it as a spectrum with Dark Souls on the one end and Sekiro at the other, then Elden Ring will be pretty close to Dark Souls. But it's not just the moves. Sekiro also has much less RPG elements. You don't level up your stats or create your build. You don't change weapons or armor as well. You get Wolf as your character and you don't customize him much. He will always swing his katana with the same moveset, and the way his stats increase or how he learns new abilities is more similar to an action game. In a way, every Sekiro player uses a variation of the same build, and that has a reason. Sekiro is handcrafted to create a specific player experience, so you always feel like this capable shinobi that Wolf is. It is also much more story-driven than any Souls game. Your character is an actual character with dialogue, motives and beliefs, and in crucial story moments he will act on his own terms and not always wait for player input. There is more talking in the game, and relationships between characters are portrayed more prominently. Environmental storytelling, on the other hand, takes a backseat. There is a lot of it in Sekiro. It is still a game from FromSoftware after all, but it is not your main source of information about what is actually going on in the world. There is much more explicit exposition, and a lot of the story and the lore is explained by characters directly. All these aspects make Sekiro feel very different to Soulsborne games. But all these aspects are also examples on how close Elden Ring is to Dark Souls and the like. From what we have seen so far, the storytelling is basically working like it was in any Dark Souls. I already talked about NPCs and how they act like they're in Dark Souls 4, but there is more. For example, the intro video, which gives you some cryptic context of the world and drops a lot of names and concepts. That's basically the formula they always use. And if you add item descriptions with hidden lore segments and a lot of environmental storytelling, then you get the Soul Storytelling 101. And thanks to all the gravestones, the ruins and all these crucified persons, the atmosphere is as bleak as it gets in any Souls games. It's a very similar image. And speaking of looks, the graphics are enhanced, but the art style is basically what you would expect from a Dark Souls 4. And that's not even mentioning the UI. Just look at it. The health bar is where it's always been, you get the same cross-shaped item boxes in the down left corner, the proven design they always use. And don't get me even started on the menus. Actually, let's have a look at the menus right now. Here we have the screen of a merchant. I found him not far away from the last fight, and I'm really grateful for him because I can finally spend my runes. I still haven't found a way to level up, and it got frustrating carrying around all these runes with no way to spend them. I bought a new shield here with slightly better physical resistance, although it's still not 100%. And also a crossbow, because it's always good to have a ranged option. I would have preferred a bow, because I don't like that you have to reload the crossbow after every shot, but at this point I take whatever I can. The same is true for the talisman that increases the maximum HP. That's kinda like a level up, so good enough. UI-wise, all of this worked exactly like in a Dark Souls game. The same is true for the equipment screen. The structure and the shown information, it's all the same. The color scheme is the only way to differentiate Elden Ring from the others. And the fact that there's only one slot for talismans, but that has to change over time. There is no way they will limit you to just one. So they reused the UI design, similar to how they reused the giant crab enemy. But while one enemy type is just a minor thing, the UI screens are a big deal, because you will see them a lot while playing Elden Ring. In general, the UI is really important and can make or break a game, and by reusing designs from another game you can create this feeling of familiarity. And that's what's happening here. I know these screens, I've been there. It's just like Dark Souls. Don't get me wrong, it is a good design, and just by itself I have nothing to criticize about it. As I said earlier, you don't need to change what is working. But if you don't change anything, then you're not creating something new. By having similar gameplay and reusing well-known designs, you present the player with a game that feels somehow nostalgic, familiar. For sequels, that's exactly what you want to do. If you are creating new content for an existing series, then the player should immediately feel like he's home. And that's what's happening to me here. From all that I've discussed so far, the combat, the story, the presentation, there just are no big differences to the Dark Souls series. If they switch the sides of grace with bonfires and change the title screen, then it really could be Dark Souls 4. God damn it, Nazgul, I'm trying to make a point here. That was rough. I better pause my analysis for now and concentrate on this fight. So let's go to round 2, and he's not here. Well, he is called Night Cavalry, so I tried it at night, and here he is. That's clever. If you have a day and night cycle, then you should do something with it. If the difference between night and day is just the lighting and the skybox, then it's an unnecessary feature. Having special events or enemies that only appear on a certain time of the day is a nice touch, and it makes the world more lively. And I just got one-shotted, wow. This is gonna be an uphill battle, so I better start the counter because this will take a while. Okay, I wanted to say more about the day and night cycle. It makes the world more lively, but there is also some risk involved. If I arrived at this place during the day, then I might have missed out on this encounter. I could pass by without ever noticing that there is a special event at night, and maybe I already missed a couple of those. On the other hand, searching the whole map 2 times, once at day and once during night, is a big time invest. In the worst case, a day and night cycle can hurt the pacing of a game. For Elden Ring, I don't really have an opinion yet, I need more experience. So this is a story for another day. Let's instead talk about the ongoing fight. It is the second enemy on horseback that I face, but this one is way tougher and also way more annoying. He is riding around a lot and there's nothing that I can really do about it. I have a crossbow now, but I'm not happy with its performance in this fight. Shooting on a fast moving target is not that easy, and since I'm not able to match the speed of the horse, I have to wait until he leaves an opening close to me. Like when he is in his recovery frames after an attack. But sometimes he attacks and immediately rides away. How am I supposed to counter that? Most of the time I'm helplessly standing around and waiting for his next move. I'm constantly in defense and the opportunities to attack are pretty short. It reminds me of some enemies in Ocarina of Time. When fighting a Stalfos or a wolf, you have to wait for their attack, block it, and then you can get some hits in. When you attack before that, you are just getting blocked, so for most of the fights, you are standing around and waiting. Similar to how I'm waiting a lot here. But in terms of realism, this is top notch. This is probably how it feels to fight someone who is riding on a horse. You can't do much unless they screw up and give you an opening. And if you screw up, then you get overrun. That's why this fight is really tense. It is a lot of waiting around, but whenever the Nazgul attacks, it is really exciting because I die so fast. I'm probably not supposed to fight it right now, but once I started a fight I can get stubborn quickly, so I continue bashing my head against this wall. I noticed that the horse has its own health bar, just like the riding enemy earlier. This fight will probably be much easier once I get the Nazgul off his horse, and since it has such a huge hitbox, I'm accidentally dealing damage to it. I want to kill the rider, but with the tools I have at the moment, killing the horse first is probably the best strategy. So I try to do that, while dealing as much damage as possible to the Nazgul. If you are wondering why I'm calling this enemy Nazgul, then you probably haven't seen a lot of the Ring movies. The Night Cavalry is very reminiscent of a Nazgul, and it's probably not a stretch to assume that his design was inspired by them. And I can't blame them, because it is a great design. This enemy looks cool. The horse itself has something phantom-like because of all the black cloth around it. It probably isn't even a horse, but something more sinister. And the rider with his cool black armor looks like the definition of the word menacing. And his weapon, this 3-headed flail, is the coolest. I hope he drops it after the fight. That's a cool looking weapon I wanna try out. But first, I have to beat him. And so far the Nazgul is giving me a hard time. When I cut to this attempt more than a minute ago, I already depleted almost half of his health. By looking at the other fights, you can imagine how long that took. This fight is extremely slow paced, and I'm not a fan of that. Being on the controller is fine, because there is so much tension, but watching this fight must be rather boring. Well, you have to endure it a bit longer, but at least the health of the horse is getting low. Alright. Now we can have a real duel. After I almost murder you on the ground, that is. And after I quickly heal up. Okay, what are you doing? Oh, you can just respawn the horse. Well, at least that clarifies that it's not a real horse. But damn it, it's so close and I'm out of Estus. If I die now, I have to do it all over again. Oh, I can't believe it. I hate the crossbow. Blocked by the horse, I can't believe it. Okay, stay calm, don't do anything rash. There will be an opportunity to chip away the last pixel of health. Finally. That was nerve-wracking. A hard-earned victory. But I don't feel much satisfaction. I like the Outrider Knight from before much more. But at least I got his weapon, which I cannot use because it requires 24 dexterity. That's a lot, and I still haven't found a way to level up. I'm not sure about this one. It looks cool, but 24 dex? Maybe in the distant future. Anyway, now that the Nazgul is back in Mordor, I can continue my way to Castle Morn. And I can continue with my analysis as well. What was I saying before the fight? Yes, something like they could just call this game Dark Souls 4. To be precise, I said that with all the aspects I discussed so far, I don't really see many differences to the Souls-like series. However, there is one topic that I haven't talked about yet, and to me it is one of the fundamental traits of a good Soulspawn game. The level design, or rather the world design, because in those games it isn't just about the levels themselves, but about how they are connected to each other. In terms of level design, I would compare these games to Metroidvanias, but in 3D. Just like on Planet Zebes or in Dracula's Castle, you explore the whole map, the whole game world. There are specific locations that feel like levels, but you are always looking at the bigger picture. When you get stuck in one area, you travel somewhere else, and mastering these games means to get used to the whole game world. Bloodborne translates this concept exceptionally well, and so does Dark Souls 1. In terms of structure, there are differences to Metroidvania games, but the sense of exploration is the same, at least for me. When traversing in these games, I'm always thinking about how the place I'm currently in is connected to others, and how I can use this knowledge to get where I want to, or to find new areas. This is supported with a level design which creates the illusion that you are exploring a real, logical place, instead of a designed level. And clever shortcuts. These moments when you open a door, find yourself in a familiar place and suddenly realize how this whole place is structured. That's just great. And it gets truly magical when all these elements work together. Like the famous elevator in Dark Souls 1 that brings you back to Firelink Shrine, or the way how you get into Yosefka's clinic in Bloodborne. Actually, the whole of Yharnam is structured like a clever big Metroidvania map. To me, this world design is as essential to a Soulspawn game as the stamina system or tough boss fights. It is one of the ingredients that defines those games, and which can also make or break one of them. For me, it's the main reason why I didn't enjoy Dark Souls 2 nearly as much as the rest of the series. But that's a story for another day. If I look at Elden Ring from that perspective, then, well, for once I have to say, it is completely different. The level/world design doesn't work like that. It's actually very far away from something like a Metroidvania. This doesn't come as a surprise, because one of the key features they kept repeating in the marketing was that Elden Ring is an open world game. And open world games usually don't have these tight, handcrafted designs. They rather focus on big open spaces and a lot of player freedom. Take Skyrim or Breath of the Wild. You start out somewhere on the map, you get quests that give you a general direction, and you can wander into any direction you want. You will probably discover new things like quests, dungeons, or Korok seeds, and you might get distracted on the way. And so far, Elden Ring is exactly that. Just look at my playthrough until now. I started out in the tutorial cave, met Vare, and from there on I was just wandering around, finding a lot of interesting encounters, and this quest that led me to Castle Morn. And I have to say, so far it's been fun. The encounter with the dragon, the battle on the big bridge, or the Nazgul just now, all these felt unique and exciting. But it's completely different to Dark Souls. In a Soulsborne you can wander in different directions, find interesting encounters and new quests, but all of this is concentrated into specific paths. Dark Souls, for example, offers you 3 paths in the beginning. All of them lead to vastly different play experiences, but they are paths, not open fields. Just in terms of level design, Dark Souls and Bloodborne are much closer to classic linear games. Super Mario World or Castlevania 1, levels that are designed with specific challenges that get harder and harder. The jump to the 3D Metroidvanias of the Dark Souls series is big, but not nearly as big as it is from Dark Souls to Breath of the Wild. In open world games you explore a big map. In linear games you master handcrafted challenges. If I had to put Dark Souls and Bloodborne into one of these categories, then it would clearly be the second. If I look at Elden Ring from that angle, if I started this game expecting an actual Dark Souls 4 with Soulsborne level design, then I would be disappointed right now. So far, the level design and the open world didn't offer anything that I like to see in a Soulsborne title. And that's why Elden Ring is not Dark Souls 4. Because the game is still fun, it works fine, and exploring these big open areas and finding these encounters, all of this feels good. My first impression is very positive, but if I would judge this game with the same criteria as Dark Souls, then I would give it a bad review. So I come to the conclusion that Elden Ring does indeed change something fundamental. The combat, the presentation and many other things are similar, but this one key aspect makes it a new experience. Earlier I described Elden Ring as Dark Souls with jumping, but now I would like to alter that to open world game with Souls-like combats and jumping. And that is new enough so I can lay this topic to rest. Elden Ring is not Dark Souls 4, no brackets here. There are lots of similarities, and this proves to me that Miyazaki and his team still want to create games like these, but in different ways. With Elden Ring they created a new formula, and that's a good thing. Because, to be honest, we don't need a Dark Souls 4. Sure, it's always nice to have more of a good thing. The Souls games are excellent, and Bloodborne as well. But because they are so excellent, you can just play them again. If your craving for another Soulsborne is so strong, then why don't you play one of the older games? Maybe in a different way, maybe with a special challenge or new builds, or just with a different route through the game. Having a fresh game in the series would be nice, but it's not necessary if you want to enjoy some good old Soulsborne action. I for myself am glad that FromSoftware is trying out new things. I love Sekiro, which is its own thing, and I'm interested to see what else they have in store. There are enough studios that churn out the same game over and over again. I don't want the Souls series to become the next Assassin's Creed or Call of Duty. I want to see what else they can come up with, and most importantly, I want to see what they are passionate about. After Dark Souls it was the Shinobi stealth thing, now it's the open world. Who knows what's next? As long as it's exactly what they want to do, I'm fine with that, even if the game will not be my cup of tea. After all, not every game has to cater to my taste. And will Elden Ring be able to do that? Because, like I said earlier, the level design is one of the strongest aspects of Soulsborne games, and so far it's missing in this one. I don't know if a game that is missing such a crucial piece can motivate me in the long run. So far, it's fun, but we shall see if this holds up. But that is a story for another day. Well, that would be a good point to end the video, but gameplay-wise there's still some more for this chapter. There is some funny irony in here, because while I was talking about level design, open worlds and how Elden Ring is different, I entered Castle Morn, and this place is clearly something that you can describe as a level. Not a level like in a Soulsborne, but rather something from a linear game, because this area is completely secluded from the rest of Elden Ring. You enter it by riding an elevator all the way to the top, and while you can see the surrounding areas from the roof, you cannot interact with them. Your only way in and your only way out is the elevator. So the level has a clearly defined starting point, and probably also a clear ending, which will presumably and hopefully be an interesting boss fight. So while I'm inside of this level, the rest of the game doesn't matter. For the gameplay in here, it doesn't make a difference how I got here. If I traveled an open world, or if I looked at the level select menu and confirmed that I wanted to go to Castle Morn next. There is no interaction with the rest. It is a level, a dungeon that could be in any kind of game and doesn't need an open world. And since it is so secluded, it is also not your typical Soulsborne area. It is too much of a classic level for that. But for me right here and now, that's great, because after wandering around in the open world for so long, it is a nice change of pace to be in this linear, tightly designed space. It complements the rest of the game well, because all the freedom and all the endless possibilities of the open world would feel dull or even worthless at some point if you never experienced the absence of it. Here in Castle Morn, the atmosphere is different, because now I'm no longer choosing my own path and can do whatever I want. Instead, I entered this place and now have to abide to its rules and have to face whatever it is throwing at me. So let's analyze what's actually happening here. I came here because Irina gave me a letter for her father. She told me that the castle is in uproar because of a riot caused by servants. When I get here and enter the central courtyard, I am greeted with a huge pile of corpses and the supposed servants, who are these strange creatures. They are a little bit similar to humans, but have a different anatomy and these small wings at the back. I can't really classify them, but in Ren Rama-sama's perspective, they are some sort of monsters. Also, they are very aggressive and in the process of taking over the castle. But when looking at them, it's hard to imagine that they peacefully worked as servants before the uprising. I assume they were made obedient by force. That makes them more like slaves, and because the soldiers here at the castle were well trained and well equipped, they were probably too frightened to start a revolution. Maybe they tried it before, but were not successful. Somehow the balance of power must have changed. However, there is no victor at the moment. The battle for the castle is still ongoing. This is used in a clever way with these encounters with multiple factions. Like before, everyone is aggressive towards me, and the soldiers of the castle and the slaves as well will attack me on sight. But they also attack each other, which creates a lot of spectacle, but also opportunities for the player. I can charge into battle and enjoy all the action around me, but if I progress carefully, I can let them duke it out and have to kill fewer enemies by myself. This is kind of a gimmick for this level, these battles between the soldiers and the slaves. I like that. It creates a distinct feeling for this area, even though it is not that remarkable on the visual side. Everything is in a shade of grey, and the building itself is just a huge castle. But the atmosphere is right, with all the corpses, damaged structures, or the hanged people everywhere. You also hear a lot of sound effects of fights close by. Makes you feel like you are in the middle of this gruesome battle. If I look at the structure of the level, it is okay, but nothing special. From the central courtyard, there are two paths that lead to the rooftop with a couple of small side roads with items on it. The two paths merge back together at the second side of Grace, and from there it is one straight path until the end of the dungeon. In terms of level design, it's not very special, and the low variety in enemy types doesn't help. If it were an area in Bloodborne or Dark Souls, it would be one of the weaker ones. One of those you tend to forget after you played the game, even with the clever gimmick of the multiple factions. The only remarkable thing are the items I found here. like a useful torch or an all-time classic weapon, the Claymore. I have fond memories of that, it was one of my main weapons in Dark Souls 1. However, I'm not able to use it because, once again, I don't meet the status requirements and I still haven't found a way to level up. Strange how that works in this game. As I said, the level is not remarkable, but the story of the side quest is nice. Close to the second bonfire, I found Irina's father Edgar, who could tell me more about the situation.
There's a face I've not seen before. I'm Edgar, warden of this castle, as ordained by Lord Godric himself. But you can see how things have turned out. The menials have all rebelled. They gave me good service, or so I thought. But it seems it was all an act. Foul creatures, as it said, and true enough, they're foul inside and out.
I'm not so sure about his perspective. He feels tricked by these foul creatures, but I can easily imagine how he and his men forced them into slavery. Well, I guess it doesn't matter anymore since now they are killing each other. But there is one thing that matters to Edgar.
I must remain to ensure the treasured sword of Morn does not fall into the wrong hands.
Okay, so he had this fancy sword and wants it back, and that's why he leaves his daughter to die. Because that's what's going to happen, right? This is a FromSoftware game, meaning that side quests for NPCs usually end in the most tragic way. If Edgar chooses to rather get that sword instead of protecting the life of his daughter, then she will most certainly die. I mean, she was already sitting alone with all her guards being dead and enemies close by. And she is blind. How else is this supposed to end? Maybe I am able to convince Edgar somehow, but I don't see how. So, whatever happens, happens. The fancy sword that Edgar wants so much was probably a present from Godric. Edgar mentioned that Godric is his lord, and that's not the first time we heard this name. Godric seems to be the head honcho of this place, and he assumably rules over all the places I visited so far. His soldiers are everywhere. They don't really control these lands, because Castle Morn isn't the only place where there are monsters that they have to fight. But in terms of military force, Godric's faction is the strongest so far. And Edgar is one of his men, and another example on how they struggle to keep their power. I'm expecting to hear more from Godric in the future, but it is too early to talk about the story, because so far there is not that much to talk about. At least now I have an objective here in Castle Morn. Retrieve the fancy swords. I bet it is guarded by the boss of this area, and I'm excited to see what it will be. I'm now on my way to it, and the second section of the castle is surprisingly vertical. There's a lot of falling down and even some platforming to get all the items. Nice idea. But again, this dungeon is nothing special, and this section is also not that memorable. It's just one straight line down. At least there are some additional enemy types to fight, like the slimes that are weak to fire damage. They look and behave like the ones from Dark Souls games, but I won't restart that topic. For my play session right now it is good enough. I'm still having fun here, but by the end of the game I will probably have forgotten about this place. Unless all the dungeons are designed as simple as this one. That would be disappointing. But that is a story for another day. So I made my way down, and it was rather uneventful, except for a group of rats that ambushed me after falling into a dark room. They killed me several times. It's embarrassing, and I'm having a hard time believing it myself, but they defeated me 4 times, which makes them the most deadly non-boss encounter so far. And they're just a bunch of rats. Behind them there's the next site of grace, and after some more exploration I was ready to face the boss. Just as a quick reminder, I'm still at the same level as at the beginning of the game, and most of my equipment is my starting gear. Please keep that in mind while watching me fail. So at last, here's my first full-fledged proper boss fight, the Leonine Misbegotten. It is obviously the leader of the slave riot. It looks different with his lion mane, but there are also similarities like the little wings on the back. because it is half lion, the king of the animals, and because it is much stronger than the rest of the slaves, it is easy to see why they accepted it as their leader. Maybe the Leonine Misbegotten was a slave as well, or it came here to free the others. And as soon as the slaves saw how it fought the humans, they gained the courage for their uprising. The Misbegotten probably also stole the fancy sword that Edgar wants back, which was a blow to the humans' morale. So in other words, I am fighting the monster that brought chaos over this place. The Misbegotten may be right, after all they were enslaved by the humans, but that doesn't matter for Ren Rama-sama. He is a monster hunter and the Leonine Misbegotten is a monster, so everything is settled. Except for the fact that he is kicking my ass. He is so quick and has a lot of tricky attack strings, especially when he does his little pirouette and attacks 2 times in a row. Dodging that is hard, but blocking is also not the best option because his attacks do so much stamina damage. My guard is breaking all the time. On the plus side, I noticed that heavy attacks from my axe stagger him, which is also true for guard counters and jumping attacks. So there's a strategy to dish out some damage as well. And as you can see, this works quite well. Both new tools, jumping and guard countering, prove to be very useful in this fight, although the Leonine Misbegotten does his best to counter them. With his fast leaping attacks he can close the distance quickly as well. And a lot of his attacks, like the two-handed overhead strike, are obviously designed to break the guard. His roar and stomp are also noteworthy, because if they connect, they leave me open for his follow-up attack. With all this going on, there is a lot of back and forth in this fight, and it feels fair because of that. And as you can see in attempt 2, I already got close to victory. In round number 3 I had a smart idea. Since so many enemies here are vulnerable against fire damage, and since the game gave me some fire grease in the castle, I assumed that fire would be very effective against the Leonine Misbegotten. It was a good idea, and as you can see in the numbers, it worked, but at the moment I should rather focus on learning how to survive against this boss instead of increasing the damage. I guess this will take a while, so let's try something new for a change. How about a Sped-Up Montage? We are back in normal game speed now, although you might think it is too slow. At least that's how I feel. In this state I can really appreciate the animations of this boss. All of his attacks are clearly telegraphed, and at this point I'm able to read them and act accordingly. This is one of the basics on why these bosses feel so satisfying, and there will probably be more examples of that in the future. And that's the end of this revolution. That was good. Very satisfying to learn the moves and to work on the execution. A good boss fight. The only thing missing was some kind of escalation, like a second phase or a unique attack it does when close to dying. But a good first boss experience, I'd like to see more of that. By the way, this must be the fancy sword that Edgar wanted. Although it looks pretty stupid. For once I'm not sad that I don't fulfill the status requirements. But this sword is mine now, which makes me the ruler of this castle, right? I defeated the Leonine Misbegotten and most of the humans are dead or fled, so I hereby announce that from this day onward, Castle Morn is Ren Rama-sama's base of operation. That's a nice ending of chapter 1, don't you think? But after all this wandering around, I will change my approach for the next episodes. Next time I will take the recommended path. I will go back to Limgrave and follow the guidance of Grace. We will see where that leads me, and if I will finally find a way to level up. Until then, farewell.